I'm not white, so how can I be a supremacist? I'm registered to Bikani Nation, and on my dad is Ojibwe and Algonquin. I'm also Ojibwe, but I'm white presenting. The system of white supremacy was not created by anyone who is alive today, but it is maintained and upheld by everyone who holds white privilege, whether or not you want to agree with it. We are at a very important time in history. Many white liberal progressives like to believe that we are in a post-racial time in history, but the truth is racism and anti-blackness are still alive and well today. BIPOC are suffering daily from the effects of historic and modern colonialism. Right-wing anti-Muslim nationalism is gaining popularity across the Western world, and anti-blackness continues to be a form of racism that we can find all around the world. It may seem like we are at a time in history when racism and white supremacy are resurfacing, but in truth they never went away. So while it is true that events in recent history, such as the US presidential election, have brought these issues to the forefront, the reality is that these issues have always been here, and BIPOC in white-dominated societies and spaces have been at the receiving end of constant discrimination, inequities, injustices, and aggression. People often think white supremacy is a term that is only used for far-right extremists and neo-Nazis. However, this idea that white supremacy only applies to the so-called bad ones is both incorrect and dangerous because it reinforces the idea that white supremacy is an ideology that is only upheld by a fringe group of white people. White supremacy is far from fringe. In white-centered society and communities, it is the dominant paradigm that forms the foundation from which norms, rules, and laws are created. These are the types of systems that created the Indian Act. And in the creation of the Indian Act, they would bring Indigenous people to residential schools. I'm sure your ancestors, it's my ancestors too, and beat them for being Indigenous, telling them that they're worthless, they're not as good, they needed to assimilate, they needed to give up their culture, they needed to give up their history, they needed to become essentially like white people, but without the same skin color. It would be hard to say that didn't leave a lasting impression and or scar on the Indigenous community. So to say just because you're Indigenous, whether you're white presenting or not, and you don't uphold those systems is just not, it's not rooted in reality. It's rooted in a ideal world. In an ideal world, yeah, the culture, the history, it would have been maintained. There wouldn't be these fractures. They wouldn't be these tendrils of white supremacy into the culture. But the reality of it is that no one got out unscathed. Being registered to a band, being part of an Indigenous community doesn't necessarily mean that you're not contributing to the system that is racism. We can see it in your own actions, in your desire to defend a white man who said that he was being bullied for being white. Like, contextually understand the difference, right? As an Indigenous person, what happened to our ancestors, what happens to Indigenous people in hospitals, what happens to Indigenous peoples in the welfare system, that systemic racism they experience. And this white man is upset because when he made content on the internet, people didn't agree with him and made videos to inform him how he was wrong. And he took it so personally, he rage quit the internet, flipped the table and said, I'm not doing this anymore. And you're jumping to his defense. He's enacting what's called DARVO, deny, attack, reverse, victim, offender. He did something that was harmful to more than one community, and instead of taking accountability, he has painted himself as the victim of the situation. And that very much gives white man, because accountability seems to be hard for him. I'm white presenting, but I'm Indigenous, but I can still take ownership over the fact that I'm white presenting and there's privilege in that. It doesn't take a lot to acknowledge it, but it does take putting your ego aside. Okay, I'm reading this book. It's called Men Who Hate Women. The book I was referencing is Me and White Supremacy. It's a workbook on basically those systems. Dr. Lisa Sugira, senior lecturer in criminology and cybercrime at the University of Portsmouth, told me, it's worth looking at the history and origins of the manosphere. If you go right back to early eucynic groups in the 1990s, you will think about the demographics of the sort of people who have used these. They are primarily white, educated, tech-savvy men, and there was this thinking about it being their space, their ownership of the space, which is something else we're thinking of when we when we think of the manosphere and their vitriol. They are claiming what is rightfully theirs, and that demographic hasn't really changed. It resembles what we saw years ago in terms of race and gender. It really is white Western men. And in terms of education, it is very much the developed countries, very much the US, Canada, Australia, and the UK. And what I've been getting through the data, I'm looking at it, is it links back to the alt-right. It's about white supremacy, and there's very disparaging rhetoric coming out towards Black and Asian men as well, which is where you get the suggestion that this is a predominantly white space. That mind is primed to go down the alt-right pipeline. When we talk about what's happening within the alt-right, it's essentially just a lot of men who don't want to take any responsibility for anything that's gone wrong in their life. They want to blame women, minorities, people of color. It's starting to sound familiar. I never blocked that Frank Dominic guy, specifically because when I made my content discussing, the alt-right pipeline and the men and the women of it all, he acknowledged he was wrong. He said he understood. And that is a green flag. This other guy, it's a red flag. Now, I'm not the gate master be-all, say-all of what's going on, but there is a large amount of people saying this is problematic behavior. And what I keep hearing is my friend over here said it's not. They're tokenizing their friends in minority groups and weaponizing those people. It's called triangulation. It's a textbook manipulative behavior, as well as telling everyone that they're just too sensitive. Who does that sound like? Starts with an orange, ends with a Cheeto, and all his group of people, they say the same thing. So how are you against what the orange Cheeto stands for while simultaneously using the same rhetoric that he uses to ignore the issues of your own community? That's why I said it's ironic. But ultimately, this video isn't for this girl. She says she's not watching any of my content. Feel free, I don't care. But for all of the people that are watching this and trying to understand the clusterfuck that it is textbook manipulative tactics, white power structures, as well as male power structures. It's not very leftist, not very progressive, very right wing.